All right, let's get started. We have so much to dive into today. I'm really excited to talk about this writing piece that ties with our independent choice and daily reading conferences. So, we're going to review what's led us up to this point in just a second, but you're going to need two things today: something to write on and something to write with. So go ahead and grab those two things if you don't already have them. But while you're grabbing those supplies, I am going to just review what led us to this point. We learned that Blue Valley students don't like to read, and as a result, they aren't reading. And so, some solutions we're creating is to allow for choice for students to discover what they like and dislike in books.
Please excuse. Thank you.
Sorry, school announcement on the intercom. Thanks for your patience. But we also want to set aside sacred time to read in school and at home. We want to confer with students daily about their reading and their writing, which is the piece we're learning about today. And then we're also going to focus on those relevant, meaningful reading and learning experiences. This is the writing piece. This is what helps students really start to think even more deeply about what they're reading. So, with the series up to this point, we've kind of determined two daily practices in our classroom. Students reading at least 10 minutes a day during our class every day, and are expected to read at home for at least 10 minutes for that 20 minutes a day, that research based number that shows the most growth, at least. And then you, as the teacher during reading time, are conferring with at least 3 students every day. In those conferences, we are looking for a couple of things in the moment, in the now. Is the student reading? How do you know? Do they understand what they're reading? And are they able to think deeply about what they're reading? And over time, these are what we're striving for: increase in volume of reading, increase in complexity of reading, and reader identity development. Are they finding their niche, their author, their genre? Are they finding that reading is, in fact, for them and something that they can do and they can enjoy? But we're going to add a third daily practice to our list. In addition, for students reading at least 10 minutes a day and 10 minutes at home, and in addition to the conferring, students will write journal entries centered on their independent reading every day. And that's what our focus for today will be. I call these thought logs. I did not invent this name. This is from the fabulous work of Kelly Gallagher, who for decades has been a proponent for choice reading and for students to think more deeply about that choice. But these are promptless journal entries. You do not give them a prompt. Students will get to a point where they'll be, of their own volition, know exactly what they want to write about and why. It becomes a key component of your reading conference. So in addition to asking those questions we talked about last week, you're going to be looking and reading their journal entries every time you confer with them. And this is going to help them do two things: develop really solid close reading skills and help them track their thinking over the course of their book. And so I want you to think about students doing two things in their writing. They're going to zoom in when they are looking at the choices authors make and why they make them. This is the close reading piece. But they also need to be able to zoom out. What big ideas or themes are developed? How do the characters develop and change? How is this book changing our thinking or our perspective on the world? And ultimately, our job is to help students bridge the two. Because the author made this choice, it reveals this big idea or theme. Because the author made this choice, we're going to see this character change and develop. So our job and our goal is to coach students to make those connections. So what does this actually look like? I'm going to show you a couple examples, but I'm going to start with the ideal example, okay? This example I'm about to read is, if all of your students wrote like this, you could pack up and go home, right? This is what we're striving for. It's not going to happen for the most part, for most of your students. Okay, so here's an example thought log. Within the first page of the novel, stark images, created through the use of italics and fragments, establish a harsh, unsettled tone. Quote, when the police find her, if they find her, when they write a report, if they write a report, they'll say she drowned. Never mind the tape around her head, never mind the marks on her body, end quote. The author's tone conveys the sense that they have no faith in the police to help solve this girl's murder, or that they even care at all. I wonder if this novel will explore the lives and deaths of those seeking to cross the border. So you don't even have to know what the name of this book is. You don't have to know what it's about, but you can tell that this student is doing two things. They're zooming in when they recognize the specific use of italics and fragments, right? This is the choice the author made. But the student is zooming out when they start to make a bigger connection about the perception of the character about the police and when they use the I wonder statement. So I can tell that this student, when they wrote this entry, is very early on in their reading phase. And you can also tell from the citation that that was from page 2, right? So that helps you get a sense of what it looks like when a student zooms in and zooms out. But what about maybe our striving students? They're starting to really develop critical thinking, but this example shows us how students will need coaching on clarity and conciseness of language. And I had to, as you can see, their handwriting is a little messy. The repeated use of guns and specific gun descriptions strengthen the relevance of them to the story. At this point in the book, the reader can see that the use of guns in the text pushes the fact that this is a violent environment. It also reinforces the backgrounds of the characters that have seen more violence in their lifetime. I can tell this student is starting to make some really great connections. They would need some coaching on how to be more concise in their language. But they're zooming in when they recognize that the author refers to guns and guns use over and over again, and when the author spends a lot of time describing the guns. Like they could recognize that that was important because it was repeated. But they zoom out when they start to make connections to the characters and that they've seen a lot of violence in their lifetime. This student has made a lot of progress, but has some room to grow. And this is another example. I think the thinking here is really starting to develop. But again, notice we're not even using complete sentences or paragraph form, just bullet notes. And this is an okay place to start. You know your students best and where they need to be at what point. Okay. So I'm just looking at that October 8th entry for this kid. It says author's choice of word colon Helva. And then they wrote Quinn has high aspirations and wants nothing more than to get a full ride through basketball. Yet he can't stand up for the kid who was almost beaten to death. So there's really two pieces here. They talk about the author's word choice, and then they talk about Quinn and his aspirations. So in the chat, would you send me which piece of that journal entry is the zooming out and which part is the zooming in? See if you can't make your own guess based on this example. Katie says Helva, the word choice is zooming in, so does Lily, and that the rest of the entry was zooming out. Zooming in from Brennan says choice of words. Zooming out was character analysis. Thank you, Brennan, for recognizing that it was character analysis. Genesis says she's zooming out when Quinn is struggling with the moral choice. Jen says Helva is zooming in. Nice. I think we got it. You guys are exactly right. When they recognize the choice the author makes, they recognize that they're zooming out with the character description. Now, the reason I would say that this is a less of a strong example is that the connection between the two is unclear to me as their teacher. I think that character analysis is really great. I would tell the student, I wonder if there's a better piece of evidence in the text that would support what you're trying to say about Quinn. And then we have other options as well. Depending on where your students are at, you may have them create some kind of graphic organizer. Just like we saw with this previous example, they weren't using complete sentences. You could have students put one column of quotes in the left and then develop their commentary. And I think this student was just tracking some additional thinking and questions as they read as well. But scaffold for your kids, provide choice, and that will make this complex form of writing accessible for every kid in your room. The key thing is make the choice available to everyone, right? If you say, oh, you could do a graphic organizer if you're really struggling, or you could do a paragraph if you're really succeeding, I would just make it clear, hey, these are all the options we can do. Choose what's best for you. But I would definitely have, especially for our middle school on level and on-level high school folks, maybe start with the graphic organizer first to organize their thinking. And then gradually, as kids start to get ready, they can start using those paragraphs. And then you can start teaching some very practical writing skills like how to embed your evidence and how to cite properly. So you can see how you can build upon skills as you move forward in this process. Okay, we're about to try this out and write our own thought log journal entries, but I want to pause here and see what questions you guys need me to address at this point.
You want us to verbally address these questions or chat
Yes,
them?
ma'am, go for it.
So as teachers, do we check these thought logs just when we sit down on our one-on-one with them? Okay.
Yes, because can you imagine trying to check these every day and grade them every day? It would be so overwhelming.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, the beauty of the conference is you can look back like, oh, I haven't seen you for a week or 2 weeks. I can look back at your journal entries and you can get a good sense of where that kid is at in that moment. And we'll talk about intervention when you're conferring with them and kind of what a mini lesson can look like when you're seeing the student struggle.
And so the thought log process happens after we're done reading, like right after, correct?
Yes. And so you might say something like, all right, folks, find a good stopping point in your reading in about 1 minute. And when you're ready, open your journals and begin writing. And eventually it'll become part of your classroom routine and structure where you won't even have to prompt or remind kids, but it's always really fun to be able to see the student who doesn't want to stop reading. And you have to kind of, oh, it's time to start writing now because they're so immersed in their book. You'll get to that point too. But yes, just make it part of your daily routine and it'll be a natural part of every day.
So really you have to set aside at least 15 minutes to do
Yes.
the whole
Yep.
thing.
Yep. And I would maybe even closer to 20. I mean, early on in this process, it's going to take them a long time to find evidence. And that's where they're going to get stuck the most is, okay, what quote am I pulling? Like, where in my book am I looking? And I want to show you a strategy in just a second on how to help them with that. But yeah, it will take longer at first.
And not to be negative, but what do you do when they don't have their logs done? Like what if they don't do them?
Well, you will see that, right? If they're in front of you, either on the Zoom or once they're back in person, I would say have that individual conversation and ask, hey, why? What's going on? Are you stuck? And then you would sit with that child and you would help them find that evidence in that moment while students are writing. Because your expectation is that we're all reading every day, we're all writing every day. I would imagine that if a kid was not, it's likely because they don't understand what they're supposed to write about, especially because it's promptless. This will take a lot of scaffolding, repetition, and modeling to get them to understand exactly what they're writing about. Let's see how we can help students find good evidence in their books. This is a strategy that you can use called LIDS. I did not create this strategy. I stole it from, I believe it's AP Literature, like when I took some training with the College Board. But it stands for language, images, details, diction, and syntax. And it's a way to help students think about types of language. Now, just providing that acronym, I found for at least my on-level 9th graders, it wasn't enough for them to fully understand how this functions in language. So I created this image of a tree. All language is the tree trunk, right? All of this on the tree are different types of language, but there are different branches or categories of language, and that's the images, details, diction, and syntax. And on those branches are examples of those types of language. So under the branch of images, an example of an image is a simile or a metaphor or personification or symbolism. And depending on where your students are at, what grade level, what they already know, you can add or detract leaves for your students. Same thing for details. On my example, I just have 2. Colors and numbers are details. Diction, alliteration, assonance, word choice, onomatopoeia. And then syntax is just sentence structure, right? So are there declarations or questions? Are sentences repeated? Are there long sentences or short sentences? So you tell your students, we're looking for these things on the leaves. And that's going to help us identify what's important in the text. This is the zooming in as we navigate the text. So let's look at an example text together. I'm going to narrow our focus just a little bit. We're going to look for either metaphors numbers, alliteration, word choice, declarations, repetition, and long or short sentences. These are the kinds of things we're going to find in this example text. In the chat, I'm going to send you guys a link to a Jamboard. Jamboards are cool because students can actually mark the text, and you can highlight the text as you see it. So the text will look like this. Your Jamboard will look like this. It should force you to make a copy. And in the Jamboard, I can highlight by clicking this, or I can underline with this pen. I think there's a laser option. Yeah, I think I'm just going to use the pen, and I'm going to choose a yellow. And so I should be able to start marking up this image. And I can also erase as needed as well. Would you give me a thumbs up once you have that Jamboard ready to go? Awesome, awesome. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start reading the paragraph aloud. And while I am reading, you should be marking your text for any of those things we just said we're going to focus on. So let me look back and just remind you guys. We are looking for metaphors, numbers, alliteration, word choice, declarations, repetition, or long or short sentences. You don't look for all of them. Maybe pick 2 or 3 that you're just going to focus on today. And I'm going to go ahead and model as well as we read. I am recording the 9/11 show to watch later. I don't want to watch it at all. I have my own version. I have a 6-minute edit of the footage that begins with shaky, very shaky camcorder shots of the house, the TV, and Nat, nickname for his daughter, playing while the towers burn. It brings the moment home more than anything else. The combination of idle happiness and the horror on the TV, the awful vertiginous feeling that the whole world was tipping over, which is exactly what it was doing, of course, and does to this day, whether we feel it or not. Take a minute and add any markings that you need to.
Abby, will you remind us again what we're looking for, please? I remember like the first 3.
All good. If you just remember the first 3, and this is what you'll tell your students too, just pick those 3. Don't worry about all of it. You don't need to find every single one, just a couple. But to answer your question, any repetition, short sentences, long sentences, metaphors. And in just a second, I'm going to put you in a breakout room, and I want you to share what you found in the text.
Oh, there we go. So what did you guys focus on when it came to the text?
I focused on a lot of the descriptions towards the end. Well, I focused, the first thing that really caught my eye was the shaky, very shaky, just with the repetition of that. And then just
And that awful vertiginous feeling that the whole world was tipping over, I think that was sort of like a metaphor, even though it doesn't follow maybe a typical pattern that kids would recognize right away. But
Well, the word vertiginous, like it doesn't matter if they don't know what it means. That's a strong word choice, right? Like that's an example of diction that they would be like, "Ooh, I'm going to circle that. Don't know what that means, but looks
It's a good
important."
sounding word.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Sentences, like they're fragments, but they're done that way for effect, like which is exactly what it was doing, of course, and does to this day, whether we feel it or not. So I do like this idea of I wish the direct
Sets up the vertiginous feeling, I think,
Mhm.
at the beginning.
You just imagine what it looks like. I can picture that.
Talking about when was this, who's involved, and then brackets are what we use for AP to do the lit devices. And so I love that you mentioned that repetition. That's what I would have put in brackets. I got that metaphor in there in my brackets. And so I was actually using those AP, the diddle steps with my annotating. So this is a
that's cool.
transition, yeah, right into what we do anyway.
Right. That's kind
Right. Right. It's also interesting. I didn't notice it until I'm reading it. That part where it says feeling that the whole world was tipping over, which was exactly what it was doing. There is a lot of like W in there, which is interesting. But I find it interesting after they do that metaphor, that's when we get our sentence fragment, which
Christy, you're fine. Do whatever you need. Don't worry. Don't even worry about joining the room. You're good.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just needed to help somebody real quick here.
No worries. Do what you need to do. Okay, I think all of us are back from our breakout room. Awesome. Folks, you're going to give your students, when you introduce this concept and we first start practicing this together, give them so much more time than I gave you, but we're just limited with our the structure of our PL this morning. But I heard you guys talking about the fragmented sentence at the end. I heard you guys talking about the repetition of shaky, very shaky, alliteration of happiness and horror, the detail of the 6-minute edit. And so if you just start there, having students identify where we see language, images, details, and diction, syntax in the text, that's the first step. The next step is to start helping them recognize what effect those choices have. And so I highly recommend just starting at the sentence level. So, and I also recommend giving them sentence templates. So the first one I would use with kids is the author's use of blank establishes, acknowledges, reveals. I put in brackets that word establishes because there's a variety of verbs that students could use. And I've provided for you, when I send out the resources for today, a list of some power verbs for analysis. So indicate, signify, reflect. Whatever verb makes the most sense in the context of the analysis the student is making, that's the verb they would choose. And then in that following blank, they provide their analysis piece. This is the zooming out, where they start to recognize the effect that the choice the author made has. So I wish I could give you guys time to practice this writing because I think you do a really nice job, but here are some examples that could have come out of this text. The author's use of repetition, shaky, very shaky, emphasizes how terrified he was when he witnessed the horrors of the terrorist attack. The author's use of alliteration create contrasting images, highlighting the simplicity and innocence of his life before this event and the trauma he will face after. The use of a declarative yet fragmented sentence at the end reveals the hopeless, haunted feelings he experienced as a result of 9/11. So some of these words like hopeless, haunted, innocence, horrors, it's helpful for students if they're starting to recognize the tone of the piece or what the author's feeling in that moment. If you help them recognize that tone is a dartboard, right? Certain words will hit the dartboard, like he's definitely sad in this piece, and that's on the dartboard, but that's not a bullseye word. The horror, he's horrified, is a much more specific bullseye word. They can get closer into the bullseye if they move from sad to scared to terrified. And you can see how there's different levels of words on that spectrum, but we're really searching for those bullseye words. Terrified. He's traumatized. He's hopeless. He's feeling haunted. But that's kind of what you should guide students on when it comes to writing these sentences. The key thing is that we need to be modeling every single day our own journal entries, so that the more often students are exposed to this kind of writing, and when they hear you model your thinking as you write, they're going to start adopting that thinking for themselves. So what this looks like in your reading conferences is as you're looking back at their journal entries, as you're talking about their reading identity and journey, provide those specific and genuine compliments, and there's some examples there. But the mini lesson is the most powerful. Let's say you're looking back at the journal entry and you're over and over and over again, they're failing to embed inside their evidence correctly. Then this is the skill that you'll focus on. Don't try to teach them several skills, just one in the reading conference. Open a blank page in their notebook and then model for them how you would do it. And then have them revise one of their journal entries in front of you while you watch. And then continue to provide that instruction and feedback. And then when you give them that feedback, hey, you're going to continue to focus on citing your evidence. I would, have a sticky note and put it in their journal and then record it in my conference notes to come back to next time. But if you wanted to up that responsibility factor, especially for our high school folks, have students leave sticky notes on their desk and have them be the one to record their feedback and keep track of it in their notebook so that they know what exactly they are focusing on as they improve their skills. Kelly Gallagher has said in his book, Write Like This, that the teacher should model by writing and thinking out loud while writing in front of the class. So I think I touched on this in just a second ago, but it's so, so important that you are writing in front of your kids, that you are doing your daily journal entries based on the book that you're reading, and that you're explaining your thinking and your process out loud in front of your kids. I would do this for my first hour. I would write my journal entry for the day in front of my first hour, modeling my thinking, but then I'm showing it to every one of my classes after, but talking them through my process. I would say, do you guys see here how I chose this verb instead of this verb? And I was thinking this here, so I chose this word, and I noticed this in my text, so that's why I pulled out this piece of evidence. Narrate your thinking over and over and over and over again, and you'll start to see students adopt that thinking in their own writing. All right, we are about out of time, so we're going to conclude here. Our next sessions include breaking free of novel-based pedagogy. We're going to start thinking about, okay, how do I summatively assess my kids in the district curriculum when they're not reading the same book? That's going to be next time after winter break. We'll talk about student-led book clubs and merging the classics following that. And then we'll end our series with how to build a community of readers. Now, these dates are subject to change based on learning mode, but this is kind of where we're at this point. I think that this, in terms of one of our tools in our tool belt, the thought log is the most complex. So if you're needing more hands-on professional learning and you would like to meet with me and we can kind of talk through this and I can maybe co-teach with you or model with you how this could look in your classroom with your students, let me know. Otherwise, I have a link for our professional learning points that you can earn through my learning plan. I'm going to leave that in the chat for you, and you are welcome to sign off when you're ready. But I'll stick around if you have any questions or concerns. Thank you, guys.